Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My boss, the general manager, has been in retail for over 20 years, and she's taught me everything I know about spotting trouble before it starts. I thought, between the two of us, we pretty much seen every scam in the book. So this Tuesday started out normal enough. We'd just opened, the morning crew was restocking shelves, and I was at the counter doing some inventory checks. Around 10 a.m. this guy walks in, and immediately my gut tells me something's off. He's wearing this expensive-looking suit like something out of a magazine, and he's got this confidence about him that screams money. He walks straight past all our mid-range stuff and heads directly to where we keep the high-end laptops, the really expensive ones that most people just look at and walk away from. I gave him a few minutes to browse, watching from the corner of my eye before I walked over. I asked him politely if I could help him find something specific. He turned to me with this perfect smile, the kind that salespeople practice in mirrors. He told me he was looking for a high-end laptop, something top of the line, and that money was no object. Now, I've been in this job long enough to know that when someone says money is no object, it usually means they're about to spend maybe $500 and act like they bought the whole store. But this guy, there was something different about the way he said it. He genuinely seemed loaded. I told him he was in the right section and asked what he'd be using it for. We spent the next hour going through specs. He knew his stuff, or at least he seemed to. He asked about processors, graphics cards, memory, the whole 9 yards. And after all that, he doesn't pick one laptop. He picks five. 5 of our most expensive models. I'm standing there trying not to let my jaw hit the floor because we're talking about over $15,000 in merchandise. I told him those were excellent choices and that I'd ring them up for him. I started heading to the register, already calculating my commission in my head, when he dropped the bomb. He mentioned casually that he'd be paying with a check. I stopped walking and repeated his words back to him, making sure I'd heard correctly. He explained that he found it more convenient for big purchases, something about less hassle, with credit card limits and all that. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing at once. Nobody pays with a check anymore, especially not for $15,000 worth of laptops. I kept my smile plastered on and told him that, of course, we could accept a check, but I needed to grab my manager to help process it since we required dual authorization for amounts this large. I practically ran to the back office where my boss was doing paperwork. I told her we had a situation, that there was a guy out front who wanted to buy 5 top-tier laptops with a check. My boss looked up from her computer with raised eyebrows and asked how much we were talking about. When I told her over $15,000, she stood up immediately and grabbed her keys, saying we should go meet our new friend. We walked out together and I could see the guy's smile tighten just a little when he saw both of us approaching. My boss introduced herself and asked to see the check. He handed it over, still playing it cool, still confident. My boss examined it carefully, then told him she'd need to see his ID too. He pulled out his driver's license without hesitation and handed it to her. She studied both documents for a moment before telling him she needed just a few minutes to verify everything, explaining it was standard procedure for purchases this large. He said he understood completely. We went to the back office. My boss immediately got on the phone with the bank while I looked over the ID. The check looked legitimate enough to me, but I'm not an expert. My boss was on hold for what felt like forever, before someone finally picked up. I watched her face change when she listened to whoever was on the other end. She hung up and told me that the account had been flagged for suspicious activity. I was shocked and asked if she was serious. She picked up the driver's license again, studying it more carefully this time. Then she opened up her computer and started typing. After a moment, she looked at me and said the ID number didn't match the photo, that it actually belonged to someone else entirely. My heart was pounding now. We had a real criminal out there, just standing in our store like it was nothing. We walked back out to the sales floor. The guy saw our faces and his smile disappeared. My boss told him there was a problem with his check and ID and that we needed to clarify a few things. He tried to recover, putting that smile back on. He said there must be some mistake and that everything was in order. My boss said we couldn't process this transaction and that she was going to have to ask him to leave. That's when he lost it. He started yelling about how we were discriminating against him, how he was going to sue us for everything we had, how we were making wild accusations. Other customers were starting to stare. I moved toward the phone ready to call security, but my boss put her hand up. She told him that if he didn't leave immediately, she was calling the police. Suddenly, his whole demeanor changed. The anger disappeared and he got this panicked look. He said okay, that he'd leave, his voice much quieter now, but my boss was already dialing. She wasn't taking any chances. She spoke into the phone reporting an attempted fraud at the store. The guy's face went white. He actually tried to run for the door, but two of our stalkers who'd been watching the whole thing blocked his path. He just stood there trapped while we waited for the cops. The police showed up in less than 10 minutes. My boss explained everything, showed them the fake check and ID, and they arrested him right there in the middle of our store. Handcuffs and everything. The other customers were filming it on their phones. One of the officers told us later that this guy was part of a bigger operation, that they'd been hitting electronic stores all over the state. Our store would have been a major score for them. If we'd processed that sale, we'd have been out $15,000 and 5 laptops. Corporate sent us both gift cards and bonuses for stopping the fraud. Now we have way stricter policies about large transactions, especially with checks. Everyone who works here has to go through fraud detection training. 2 weeks later, we found out he'd successfully scammed 3 other stores in neighboring cities using the exact same method. We were the first ones to catch him. My boss still jokes that her paranoia finally paid off. Mine too, I guess. So this happened back in 2013 when I was working as an insurance adjuster. My job was pretty straightforward. I'd go to tow lots after accidents, look at damaged vehicles, and decide whether they were totaled or could be repaired. I worked for a pretty big insurance company, the one with a gecko mascot, if you know what I mean. The tow lot I'm talking about had a special arrangement with the state police. They didn't just handle regular tows, they also stored vehicles that were being held evidence. These cars were kept in a separate section behind an additional locked gate inside the already secured yard. Important detail for later. I've been working this job for about 2 years at that point. Started right out of college, figured it was decent money, and I got to work independently most of the time. My typical day involved driving around to different tow yards, taking photos, writing up damage estimates, and sending my reports back to the office. That morning, I showed up at the lot around 9. Had 2 vehicles to appraise from a minor fender bender the night before. Neither car was too badly damaged, but one had multiple flat tires and the other had busted windows and no headlights, so neither could be driven away from the accident scene. Pretty routine stuff. I finished up the first vehicle without any issues, took my photos, noted the damage, started filling out my paperwork on my tablet. Then I moved on to the second one. I had my headphones in, listening to this punk album I was really into at the time. The lot was pretty quiet, just me and the occasional staff member moving around. While I'm working, I notice out of the corner of my eye that the gate to the police evidence section has swung open. There's a woman, maybe 50 years old, walking into that restricted area. I don't think much of it at first. Maybe she worked there or had permission or something. The vehicles I was working on were on the same side but about 50 meters away from that evidence section, so I went back to what I was doing. I'm taking the last few photos I need, including the vehicle identification number that's visible through the windshield on the dashboard. My back is turned to the evidence lot at this point. Then suddenly, without any warning whatsoever, someone grabs both my headphone cables from behind and rips them out of my ears. The woman demanded to know why there were 2 cars in front of hers blocking her from getting it out. I spin around completely shocked. This woman is standing right behind me, my headphones dangling from her hand. I asked her not to touch me and told her I didn't think she should be in that restricted area. She went off on me about how I shouldn't be listening to music on the job or slacking off taking pictures of other people's belongings. She actually accused me of being back there to steal things. I tried to point at the giant logo on my jacket, the one that clearly identifies me as an insurance adjuster, but she just keeps going. She demanded to know if I was going to do my job or if she needed to call the police because I was refusing to give her her property. I asked her if she'd gone into the office yet. She said no, she'd seen me here, and I needed to move these cars so she could get hers and leave. Before I can say anything else, she walks over to the first car that's blocking hers and opens the door. She's actually getting inside. I started yelling at her to stop, telling her she couldn't go in there because that was police evidence. I immediately pull out my phone and call the tow company office. Karen is now sitting in this car that's literally being held by the state police. She asked where the keys were since I wouldn't move the cars for her. I told her the keys were in the office with the employees. Within seconds, the manager comes running out. He's got one of those combination phone walkie-talkie things in his hand. The manager yelled at her to get out of there, telling her those cars were property of the state police. He's frantically using his device to call someone while yelling at her. Then he notices something that makes him stop dead in his tracks. The chain that was keeping the evidence lot secured has been cut. Not broken, not picked, cut clean through with bolt cutters. He looks around and spots the bolt cutters themselves thrown into her car. This woman had actually brought bolt cutters, cut through the security chain, and broken into the police evidence lot. The manager and Karen start arguing back and forth. She's screaming about how she has a right to her property. He's telling her she's committed about 15 crimes. I just stand there finishing up my paperwork because, honestly, what else am I supposed to do at this point? About 8 to 10 minutes later, 7 police cars come flying into the lot. 7. Lights flashing, the whole deal. The manager greets them and starts explaining the situation. But before he can get very far, Karen starts screaming at the officers that I had stolen her car. She's pointing at me, yelling about how I'm a thief and I wouldn't help her. One officer tells her to stand in a specific spot and assigns another officer to stay with her. Turns out the lieutenant on scene was actually the guy in charge of overseeing all the towing licenses for the county. He was taking this very seriously. After getting the manager's version of events, the lieutenant comes over to me. The lieutenant asked me to tell him what happened. I start explaining everything, how she grabbed my headphones, how she broke into the evidence lot, how she got into the police vehicle. While I'm talking, Karen overhears what I'm saying and completely loses it. She starts yelling and tries to rush toward me. The female officer who was standing with her grabs her arm to stop her. Karen yanks her arm away and actually shoves the officer. The officer falls backward onto the ground. Karen is screaming incoherently now, charging straight at me. The lieutenant steps directly in front of me as a barrier. Then I hear it. The most satisfying sound. The crackle of a taser. Karen goes completely limp mid-charge. She face plants into the dirt and gravel of the lot and actually skids forward a little bit from her momentum before stopping. They immediately flip her over and handcuff her. Once everything calms down, the full story comes out. Karen had apparently walked onto the lot carrying those bolt cutters while I was inside the office talking to staff about my 2 vehicles. She'd been wandering around the lot looking for her car, cut the chain to the evidence section, and then spotted me. Pure coincidence that I happened to be working near where her car was being held. The charges kept piling up. Burglary for breaking into the secured area. 2 counts of tampering with evidence for breaking in and getting into a police vehicle. Assault on a police officer for shoving that female officer. Assault on me for grabbing my headphones. Trespassing, resisting arrest. It was a long list. I found out later that she did actual jail time, though I'm not sure exactly how long. The whole thing was insane. Fast forward several years, I'd done well for myself and actually ended up buying my own tow company. One day we impounded a car for being illegally double parked. The owner came in to pay the fees and get her car back. It was Karen. She walked in, saw me behind the counter, and her face went completely white. She recognized me immediately. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then without saying a single word, she pulled out her wallet, paid the impound fee in cash, took her keys, and left. No arguments. No drama, just quiet compliance. I'm the type who keeps to himself, goes to work, comes home, maybe grills some burgers on the weekend. That's it. Simple, quiet, Exactly how I like it. I moved to this neighborhood about 3 years ago after my divorce was finalized. I needed a fresh start, somewhere peaceful where I could just exist without any complications. The neighborhood was perfect for that. Everyone minded their own business, gave a friendly wave when you passed by, and that was enough. Mr. Henderson lived across the street, a retired veteran who spent most of his days tinkering with his old Mustang. Mrs. Lee next door had this garden she was incredibly proud of, always out there with her sun hat, watering her roses. The couple down the block had a golden retriever that would sometimes wander over for pets. It was everything I needed. Then she moved in. Karen appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Moving truck pulled up across the street right next to Mr. Henderson's place. I remember thinking it was nice that he'd have a closer neighbor since the house had been empty for months. I even walked over with a six-pack of beer to welcome her, trying to be friendly. That should have been my first clue. She took the beer, looked at it like I'd handed her something toxic, and told me she didn't drink cheap beer. Didn't even say thank you. Just closed the door. The first few weeks were quiet, but I noticed things. Little things. Karen would stand on her porch with her arms crossed, just watching everyone, judging. I caught her taking pictures of Mr. Henderson's car once. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was documenting violations. Violations of what? I had no idea. Then the complaint started. First, it was Mr. Henderson's car. He parked it in his driveway, maybe a foot over the property line onto the sidewalk. Nobody cared. Nobody except Karen. She left notes on his windshield. Then she started knocking on his door at all hours, demanding he move it. Mr. Henderson, being the patient man he was, would apologize and adjust it, even though he didn't need to. Then it was Mrs. Lee's garden. Karen claimed the flowers were attracting bees, and she was allergic. Mrs. Lee offered to plant different flowers, but Karen said the whole garden was an eyesore and needed to go. When Mrs. Lee refused, Karen called the city about some made-up code violation. The inspector came out, found nothing wrong, and left. That only made Karen angrier. I tried staying out of it. I really did. But it was getting harder to ignore. That Saturday morning, I was sitting on my front porch with my coffee, watching the sun rise. It was one of those perfect mornings where everything felt right with the world. Then I heard the screaming. I looked over and saw Karen standing in the middle of the street, red-faced and furious, jabbing her finger at Mr. Henderson. He was standing by his car in his bathrobe, looking confused and tired. Karen was screeching about how his car was a hazard, and how she could have tripped over it on her morning walk. Mr. Henderson tried to explain that the car was barely over the line and that he'd move it right away, but she didn't need to yell about it. Karen kept screaming at him, calling him inconsiderate and reckless. I set my coffee down and walked over. I didn't want to get involved, but Mr. Henderson looked like he needed backup. I told everyone to calm down and pointed out that Mr. Henderson was already agreeing to move his car, so the problem was solved. That was a mistake. Karen spun around so fast I thought she might fall over. Her eyes locked onto mine with this intense hatred I'd never seen directed at me before. She demanded to know who asked me to get involved and accused me of always sticking my nose where it didn't belong. I said I was just trying to keep the peace, but she told me not to and to mind my own business. She walked off back to her house, slamming the door so hard I heard it from across the street. Mr. Henderson apologized to me, even though none of it was his fault. I told him not to worry about it and went back to my now cold coffee. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. Karen found something wrong with everything. The couple down the block put up Christmas lights in October. Karen complained to the homeowners association. Someone's trash can was out of date too long. Karen took pictures and sent emails. She was making everyone miserable, and people started avoiding the street altogether just to dodge her. Then came the thing with the dog. The couple down the block had this sweet golden retriever. His name was Max, and he was the gentlest dog you'd ever meet. Sometimes he'd bark at squirrels or the mailman, but that was it. Normal dog stuff. One evening I was in my front yard pulling weeds when I heard Karen shouting again. I looked up and saw her standing in the street pointing at Mrs. Johnson, who was holding Max's leash. Karen was yelling that the dog was a menace and demanding that Mrs. Johnson do something about it. Mrs. Johnson tried to explain that he was just a dog and that he barked sometimes, but he was harmless. Karen wasn't having it. She said Max barked at all hours and she couldn't sleep or relax, and that Mrs. Johnson needed to get rid of him. Mrs. Johnson stood her ground and said she wasn't getting rid of her dog because he was part of her family. I dropped the weeds and walked over. I didn't want to, but someone had to say something. I suggested that maybe we could find a solution that worked for everyone. Wrong move again. Karen turned to me and her face twisted into something I can only describe as pure rage. She shouted that I was always meddling and that she was sick of it. Then she lunged. I barely had time to react before she was on me, clawing at my face and screaming. I stumbled backward, trying to push her off without hurting her. Mrs. Johnson was yelling for help. Max was barking. It was complete chaos. I heard sirens. Someone must have called the police when the shouting started. 2 officers arrived and had to physically pull Karen off me. She was still screaming, thrashing against them, accusing me of attacking her. One of the officers told her to calm down while she screamed that I had attacked her and demanded that they arrest me. She claimed I'd been harassing her for weeks, but then Mr. Henderson stepped forward, then Mrs. Lee, then Mrs. Johnson. One by one, the neighbors spoke up, telling the officers everything, how Karen had been terrorizing everyone, how I was just trying to help, how she'd attacked me unprovoked. The officers handcuffed Karen and put her in the back of the patrol car. She was still screaming when they drove away. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.